The Tales of a Red Clay Rambler is made possible in part by Starworks, host of the 2022 Woodfire NC International Conference. The conference will kick off May the 21st with two pre-conference events happening simultaneously in Asheville and Seagrove, where visiting artists will load and fire a variety of wood-firing kilns. The main conference runs from May the 26th to the 29th at Starworks in Star, North Carolina, and features artists from around the world discussing the future of wood-fired ceramics. For more information, please visit woodfirenc.com. Welcome to the Tales of a Red Clay Rambler podcast, featuring interviews with culture makers from around the world. This is Ben Carter. I'm going to be your host. If you'd like more information on the show, please visit our website, talesofaredclayrambler.com. Welcome back to episode 413 of the podcast. Thank you all for tuning in. Today on the show, I talk with Donna, Polseno, and Dara Hartman about the Women Working in Clay Symposium. This is a yearly gathering that started in 2011 and is held on the campus of Hollins University in Roanoke, Virginia. This year's symposium will be happening June the 13th through the 15th, and registration for that is currently open. If you'd like to find out more information about the symposium, you can follow them on Instagram under Women Working in Clay Symposium. Before we get to that interview, I wanted to thank the folks that donate to our podcast. We are listener supported, and I couldn't do it without the generous contributions of folks like Christine Gonzalez, Wendy Dubin, and Amy Sanders. If you'd like to get involved yourself, you can make a donation today at talesofaredclayrambler.com/donate. Without further ado, we'll get to the interview. I'm going to start by having you guys introduce yourselves so that the listener can associate your voice with your name. So Dara, let's start with you.
Okay, my name is Dara Hartman, and I am a full-time studio artist in Salt Lake City, Utah, and I'm the director of the Women Working with Clay Symposium.
Hi, I'm Donna Polseno. I'm the founding director of Women Working with Clay Symposium, but I'm also a full-time studio artist, sculptor, and potter.
Well, I appreciate you both being here today, and I thought we would actually start talking about equity in the field. We're going to talk a lot about the symposium, but Mary Beringer had written a really beautiful essay that started off the exhibition catalog for the 10-year celebration of the Women Working in Clay Symposium, and she just talked about her journey and her path coming into the field in the 70s and the equity for women at that point compared to now. So I thought we would both talk about your experience with equity in the field, just to contrast that, because it's drastically changed. So Donna, could you start talking about the place of women in the field when you came in?
Well, Mary Beringer and I are the exact same age, so it is a very similar experience. I started art school at the Kansas City Art Institute in 1968, and I went into ceramics serendipitously. I was going to be a painter like my father, but I studied with Ken Ferguson, who was an amazing teacher and artist and man, but he was of a generation that women were seen differently and treated differently. There's no question about it. So I certainly felt that in the field in general when I was young, and a little bit in graduate school, less in graduate school, and certainly in the early part of my career. I always tell people the first time Rick and I sold some work, my husband, Richard Hensley, is also a potter, and we went together and sold some work to a gallery in Washington. And when we came back, I went back to the gallery for some reason later, and it said Richard Hensley for all of the work.
Wow.
My name wasn't even there. So I have lots of stories like a lot of people my age, but that was certainly something that I was thinking about when I created this symposium.
I've heard people of your generation talk about this. It was almost just assumed, at least at the Kansas City Art Institute. Now, I hope you'll feel comfortable sharing about that stage, but that men were kind of pushed to the front and women were kind of drug along, which was dumb because there were amazing artists in your era of the Kansas City Art Institute. So can you talk about that, like the gender imbalance in terms of the energy that the teachers were putting forth?
Yeah. Well, it was very different between Victor Babu and Ken Ferguson. Victor, was just an amazing man, and I never felt any of that disparity from him. And I always tell people I was almost too young to totally get it until later, some of the things that happened. But truly, the men were taught how to fire the kilns, and the women weren't. Rick had to teach me how to fire a kiln. And there was just so many subtle ways. The guys, okay, we're going over here. We're going in the damp box to look at pictures. We're going to build a kiln. And it was just a guy thing. And I mean, that it was never anything unkind or cruel to me. I never experienced some sexual harassment or anything like that, but it was a guy's club. And, there is a famous joke that I've told before, and I think it's really funny, but Ken Ferguson did tell me that I got an A because I didn't wear a brassiere. And I was just so young and naive. I just kind of laughed, and, he was an amazing man. And I have a hard time with this contradiction. So I'm not somebody on a bandwagon to talk about what a bad person he was. He was not a bad person. He was of a generation, that was just very different. His wife, Gertrude, was this wonderful woman, and she was wonderful to all of us. And I can only say my experience of being at the Art Institute was incredible. And I was there with, Kurt Weiser and Sylvia Granatelli and, Stan Welsh and James Watkins and Richard Hensley and, Catherine Kennedy at the time, Catherine Charbot. And so there were so many amazing people. And so my experience was this part of this incredible community and the sense of, clay and together. But it definitely, as I said, as I got older, I realized more and more, oh my God, we were treated so differently. So it's just an interesting story.
Who were the women working in the field that you looked up to at the time?
We did not find out about too many women. In historically, he would talk about the people of that generation. It was the Polseners and Don Wrights and blah, 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 But we did, certainly I heard about Karen Carnes and Viola Frey and I'm just trying to think, Wildenhain, I'm forgetting her first name all of a sudden.
Yeah,
Marguerite Wildenhain. Yeah, so there were definitely some women's names, but it wasn't nearly as many as the men's names. And so I didn't really think about like that, in terms of role models at all until later. But my senior year, Ferguson hired Jackie Rice to come and teach. He thought we need a woman, to his credit. And so she came, and she was fresh out of graduate school and had a young son. And she became more of a friend, in some ways, but we were lifelong friends. But that was amazing transformation for us to have a woman. But it was really difficult between her and Ferguson, because Ferguson liked the idea of having a woman there, but the reality of having a woman there. And he could be quite unkind about things he said about her, and like she was neglecting her son, or, it wasn't good, so we felt a lot of sympathy for her. And I got caught in the middle of the two of them, because that's when she encouraged me to hand build and to do some things different than the thrown, Asian pottery doctrine that I had been learning, which I still love, but she was opening up doors. And I specifically got in between them. And one time he was like, "You've ruined her. She was going to be a good putter and now you've ruined her." And I'm in his office. This is between the two of them and I'm crying. So it was a story. It was a story.
That's an intense time. And one of the reasons that I wanted to talk about this is for younger listeners. We talk about that there's not equity in the field and there's a lot of improvements we can make, but there's more equity now than there was in the 70s. And that's why I want younger people to understand that there's been a lot of work that has been put into getting us where we are today.
Thank you, Ben, because I think that's a very important point.
Well, Dara, can you talk about your experience when you came into the field? How did you see equity in the field at that time?
I was incredibly fortunate to have very supportive female and male role models in undergrad and grad school, working with Sylvie Granatelli and Stacy Snyder in undergrad, as well as David Crane and my painting professor, Janet Newald. And then Rick Hensley as well during my apprenticeship with Donna. And of course, Donna was a big role model. And then going to grad school, working with my faculty there, I had really supportive role models there as well. There was, I guess, in grad school, there were times I did feel a little left out as a woman in the field. It was a very small program, but there were moments of exclusion. Not a lot, but there were some. And I would say in the field, I feel like there is, it has come a long way. The field is much more equitable now. One experience that I have had was working as a product designer here in Utah, which was a challenge as a woman working in an office that didn't support women. And I did that for about 3 years and ended up leaving because I just felt like it was too much of a challenge. And I wanted to focus on my work in the studio.
One of the needs for inclusion is that there's a lot of passive exclusion. You've both mentioned times in which there was just energy going towards the men. Sometimes it's not in your face, like you guys come and everyone's out. It's not as obvious as that. It's a more subtle thing, but it doesn't make it any less impactful. So I kind of want to fast forward into the time of starting the symposium and talk about the need for that at the time. It's 11 years old this year. And where you saw the symposium filling some of the gaps that we've talked about in your own experience.
It was really important for me to think about that at the time, but it's interesting that it's even changed since I created it, that I feel that, in the last 5-6 years, that in some ways we're almost going backwards. Like I felt like when I was creating it, I was mostly really thinking about celebrating how incredibly far we had come since I was, a young student. So the idea was, wow, there's so many amazingly successful women in the field, and I'm going to create something. It is a women's college, but, there are graduate programs with men, and there was a writer's workshop that already existed that was, had male teachers and male, participants. So I was asked by the president to create something, a summer program of some sort to just strengthen the college. It's a small liberal arts women's college, and, there's struggles for sure. And so I thought, well, I'm just going to only have women as presenters or teachers or whatever I do. And they asked me specifically because I taught so many workshops and summer programs, Pamela and Haystack, La Meridiana, and things like that. So they thought, and ceramics is a workshop oriented, subject. So I just thought, I'm going to just have women. I'm just going to show how far we have come. And so I thought that was the main thing, but I also really wanted to have it be more egalitarian than the idea, the old model that I remember from being young, where there was a lot of women sitting around looking up at Polseno or Donna Wright's, both wonderful men. I'm not picking on them, but I'm just saying that the male role models and the women themselves were culturally, trained to adore them. It was all sort of part of the cultural thing. It wasn't just a one-way street. And so I thought, no, I don't want that. I want the presenters, no matter how famous they are, to be part of the group, that we're all having this, kind of community together. So I really thought about the people that I would invite in that way, that they would want to be part of that and not just want to be a superstar and everybody else is watching. I wanted to create something that was about conversations between everyone in a very equal way. So that was one of the most important things I had in my mind. And also the idea that I would really promote the idea that women supporting each other, is such an important idea through mentorship or teaching. And, it is for everyone, but in particular, because we've come so far, to keep, reinforce that idea that we need to support each other and pay attention, to that. And so because I had been a teacher at a women's college already for a while, and I'd had apprentices for so long, and we had one male apprentice who was wonderful, but all the rest have been women, coincidentally. And that has had such a big impact on both Rick's and my lives that I just thought the idea that I could create something that would reinforce the idea that we're all equals and that we need to support each other in community.
Yeah, I like that you brought up the actual structure of the symposium. I've heard, I think it was you describe it as that you wanted the audience, or maybe Mary in her essay, that you wanted the audience to close a circle with the presenters. So there's no hierarchy, there's no expert and not expert. Yeah. So Dara, can you talk about this upcoming symposium? Like how do you guys think about that now? Like how do you structure this to keep that closed circle so everyone is included?
Well, the way that the symposium is set up is we have 2 potters and 2 sculptors, and it's kind of in a large room and odd-shaped room. The 2 potters are on one side and the 2 sculptors are on the other. And the audience can move between, the attendees can move between the 2 groups. And the demonstrations are a tool to lead to a dialogue between the artists, and then for the attendees to engage, and for that conversation to go back and forth between the attendees and the artists. So it's really this intimate setting. We cap the attendance at 75 so that we can keep it to a smaller group and keep it intimate. And we also have implemented the attendee slide talk so that the attendees can share images of their work and stand up and talk about their work as well. And we have the small object exchange where everybody, the attendees and the artists, bring a small object that they can set up on display for the week. And then at the end, we all exchange objects. So it's really this inclusive, this great dialogue that goes back and forth.
One of the things that I do as a podcaster is I collect stories. And I think storytelling is something that we do in ceramics a lot, Yeah. And a symposium is such a great opportunity for people to be either the presenter to be telling a story to the crowd, or as you mentioned, there's just an intimacy of back and forth when you set something up like this. So can either of you talk about the role of story as a way of presenting and also sort of unifying our field?
Sure. It's a big subject. Yes, I'll just say, I think that we actually titled the exhibition that we had to celebrate the 10 years called 10 Years of Telling the Stories, because you realize that when you get people together in a sense of community like that, that's what happens, is these personal stories. And you just find yourself constantly like, oh my goodness, you find out so many surprising things about people that you thought you knew everything about, And so I think that's what really does create a sense of that we are all in this. And I would have never thought that you struggled with that. I tell people all the time as a mentor, I share my weakest moments with, I share everything with the people that are around me. And they're always like, oh my God, I would have never thought that you. I said, that's just the point. That is such an important point. And so I do think that the stories that people tell just bring people together, and they feel supported by the very fact that other people have experienced something even vaguely similar to what they're experiencing.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that, the attendees will ask questions of the presenters, and it can spark a story that can then relate to everybody, or, a few people in the audience, and then a conversation starts from there about that topic. Yeah.
The power of identification is so strong. Like when you're hearing your story come out of someone else's mouth, that ability to go, huh? Like it's like a breakthrough moment. And I've experienced that both in ceramic life and in other areas of my life. But I wanted to take a little sidetrack and talk about your relationship with each other, because you've worked together as mentor-mentee and studio, working in the studio. So maybe, Dara, can you talk about what you sought from Donna working with her in the studio?
Oh, wow. So I first met Donna at when my teacher, Stacy Snyder, brought in Donna to give a talk at Virginia Tech when I was a student there. And gosh, I loved her story. She just had such a remarkable story, and I was blown away by her work. And I knew I wanted to work with her. I mean, she was an immediate role model for me. I just wanted to learn everything about her. And so then I found out she was looking for an apprentice, and I reached out to, all of my professors, and they were like, she's just waiting for you to call. You just need to call her. So I finally called her, got up the nerve and called her. And about a week later, we were sitting on her front porch having tea, just having a very casual conversation, getting to know each other. And it was all over from there. I ended up working at her studio for 2 years, and I just got as much as I could from her. I would stay the night at her house and just work as much as I could to learn everything that I could about her business, about her work, about her process, about running a business, taking photographs, going to shows. And then on top of that, as a young woman, I was in my early 20s at that point, and I just grew so much and learned so much about myself. At that point, I had never voted. And we had talked a lot about my responsibility as a woman to vote and to be engaged in these topics and in politics, and to be aware. And so I learned so much more than just how to work as an artist. I grew as a woman.
Yeah, Donna, can you talk about it from your end, bringing in apprentices and what you've or what you feel like you had to offer Dara and other apprentices?
Rick and I decided to take on apprentices because really partly because of seeing Sylvie Granatelli had done it already for a number of years, and thinking that it just seemed, like a very satisfying thing for both sides of the issue. And it was just a moment where I had realized that for a long time, I had built a small studio that was my sculpture studio, so I could separate my pottery and my sculpture and have a mental space to go and do that. And that was really great. But then things were shifting, and I was doing way less kind of production with my pottery. It was really changing. And I thought I could actually put them back in the same studio. I'm not running a business quite in the way I was for a long time, where I actually had a few part-time employees helping me slip cast at the time. So things really changed in my work. And so I thought, I have this little space, maybe we, look, we're already old. We know a lot of stuff, and Rick's a genius, for God's sakes. I mean, anybody that gets to hang around Rick and talk about glazes or kilns is a lucky person. So,
Yep.
So we decided to try it. So I just told everybody, yeah, I think maybe I'll do that, but I wasn't doing anything active to have it happen. And so that's where Dara just kind of landed in our laps. And it is an amazing thing, when you meet somebody, and we met each other right after 9/11. I mean, it was a few days after 9/11. So it was an incredibly poignant moment in the world. And there we were, and you just think, how you meet people, and you just think, oh my God, my soul is found on
Yeah.
a part of itself. And it was amazing. And it made us want to continue to do it. And we've had, wonderful apprentices and experiences. We don't do it anymore. We downsized and we live on the side of a mountain with a much smaller studio in a little cabin, and we're very happy in that situation. So we don't do apprentices anymore, but we did it for 15 years, and they're all my family. Every one of them could call me in the middle of the night, and I'd go find them. And I always said, when I spoke about this in Sika recently, I said that sometimes I think I got more out of having apprentices than they did. So I hope it all worked out equally.
Yes, I feel like I have an extended family with all of the sisters and, just all of the other apprentices. They're like sisters to me. I mean, was a great experience, and getting to know them now, it's great because we weren't there at the same time. So now we're, reaching out and connecting in other ways. So
yeah, I have encouraged them all. I've made sure they all met each other in any circumstances that allowed it, and creating kind of a family out of it, because all of them were at different stages. And I just think that, all the support a person can get is really good. So I have really encouraged that. So I'm very much about community. I grew up in an Italian family. We were a team. My parents always told us to take care of each other. Then I became a hippie, and I was, staying in communes, and it was all about community. Then I fell into ceramics. Oh my God, it's such a community. It always has been historically, so this is just part of who I am.
We'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors. Scut is a proud sponsor of the Tales of a Red Clay Rambler. Scut Ceramic Products has been in manufacturing equipment for potters since 1953. Their reputation as a pioneer in innovative kiln design continues with the fourth generation of this family-owned business. Their KilnMaster touchscreen controller offers a sleek, smartphone-like interface that is both intuitive and packed with powerful tools that allow potters to easily program, diagnose, and remotely monitor their kilns. With 5 dedicated kiln technicians on staff and the most comprehensive network of distributors across the globe, you can be assured that Scut will be there for you before and after the sale. For more information on their line of kilns, visit scut.com. This episode of the podcast is also sponsored by Amico Brent. For the past 100 years, Amico Brent has been creating ceramic supplies for our community, ranging from underglazes to electric kilns. With over 3,000 products, Amico Brent's top priority is making sure that all of their customer needs are met. From the professional to the student and everyone in between, their high-quality materials enable you to make your best work. To learn more, check them out at amico.com or on Instagram and Facebook at Amico Brent. You can also show them how you use Amico by sharing your work online with the hashtag HowIAmico. Part of both of your practices that are linked is the process of slip casting. And I'm a thrower, and I can say slip casting anything sounds simple, but it is not simple to be able to slip cast production wares. So you both kind of have two-part careers where you do slip cast functional pots that are a part of what you make, but then Donna, in your case, making sculpture, and then Dara, in your case, making these, I don't know what they're, the hanging pieces.
Ceramic
what
quilts.
are they called? Yes.
Yeah.
Both of which are extremely complicated. So can either of you start and talk about thinking through a more complicated form with slip casting?
Oh. Yeah, go first.
Well, I, through a more complicated form, I think my pottery forms have really become simpler, although still complicated because I like to carve them. And so I started to, let me back up a little bit. I worked as a product designer a few years ago, and it kind of changed the way I think about my process and thinking about designing the pieces from start to finish and thinking about the scale and everything through paper. So I make these paper maquettes first, and that allows me to really kind of refine my form and then and figure out the scale that I want and the texture that I want on it. And then I make I can scale it up so it'll shrink to the right size that I want. So then I scale it up so that I can then cast it in plaster, then slip cast it, carve it, and then make another mold from that. So I think about it, how much it's going to shrink in my pottery pieces. In terms of the sculptural pieces, I'm doing the same sort of thing, these ceramic quilt pieces, and thinking about, again, creating a blank that I can carve, but then I want these pieces to also, for you to be able to see through these pieces and the color on the other side. They represent a kind of a crocheted bedspread in a way that you can see through, see the blanket underneath. And so, yeah, it's this complex form that I've had to think through. How am I going to carve it? How do I put it together? And how do I get the color on the inside? And how do I hang it? So this has been years in the works of thinking through every single step of this. It's been a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. And I love those pieces. They engage the viewer because they're in space. So you automatically, when you see something hanging, I think we're maybe more aware of our bodies because we can walk around it, in 3D. But you mentioned being able to see through it, which is just phenomenally hard in ceramics. Like there's a lot of historical ceramics where people would pierce them, but then you had the labor of cutting.
Yeah.
So the advantage of slip casting is that you have these beautiful round edges, but how do you accomplish the color on the inside? Like this idea of seeing through color and seeing what's behind it's interesting visually.
To apply the color, I bisque these pieces and then put wax on the outside. And then I have underglaze that I've thinned out and I dip them in the underglaze and then fire them again to cone 5. But I like this idea of creating. So there are several things that came together when I started thinking about these pieces. I was going to do a residency at the Jingdezhen Ceramic Institute. I was in 2018. I had also started working with Donna on the Women Working with Clay Symposium, and I was getting ready to give a talk. And so all of these things were coming together. And when I did the residency, I was thinking about I wanted to make something different while I was there. And so I started thinking about my grandmother's quilts and the objects that my grandmother's made. And I'm walking around China and I'm seeing these beautiful textiles that are inspiring and making me think about sitting with my grandmother crocheting and doing needlepoint. And I'm walking around these gardens in China and seeing these windows. These gardens, they have these, what do they call these windows? Windows to another space. And so it's all about this aesthetic of being in a space, looking through a space, and the window frames that other space. So it becomes like another picture in a way. And so I like this idea that, I'm creating these openings that you see one thing, but then you can see beyond it and walk around it as well.
You talk about the influence of China. It's amazing. I was thinking back to being in the gardens in Suzhou, which is most Chinese gardens are built on rectangles because everything's built on a courtyard. So European gardens kind of go out in space, and Chinese gardens are defined by either windows, walls, or pass-throughs, as you're discussing. And it's so profound to look through a window and see like, oh, what's on the other side? And I love this sense of your hanging pieces also have that, like that desire to want to move around them. So Donna, I wanted to bring in the figure sculpture that you've done, or really vessels that reference the figure, and talk about how you can slip cast those, because they're also pretty complicated.
Well, that's what I started with slip casting, was figures that were vases that were inspired by my sculptural pieces that had gotten more and more figure, and now, are completely figurative. But at a time they were going through a transition. I've been around a while, but I first was known for slab-built raku pieces is what I became known for. So the evolution, the next step, those pieces were changing, and became sort of more, more figurative and feeling. And as they changed, I was very, I had a kind of precocious career, in my late 20s with this raku work. But then as I changed my work, I wasn't having as much success. And so I had to figure out a way to do something. It was actually Rick, my husband, who said, these figurative pieces you're making are amazing. You should try and make something that you could reproduce, that was inspired by this vases, So that's when I got into the idea of the slipcast, because they were complicated forms that to slab build them and make, more than one or two of them was quite difficult. So that was the beginning of slipcasting for me. The things I do now are still, certain forms. If I slab build them, I still do plenty of hand building, even with the pottery now. I throw and alter and cut some things, and I do more slab work. It's sort of more of a mix of all of them. But certain ones, when I do a series of these trays that are very complicated shapes, slab building them, it takes me a really long time. It only takes me a little less time to slipcast them and clean them up and add the handles, and and then when I go to glaze them, it's 2 days for, no one can believe how long it takes me to glaze. It's ridiculous. So everything has its time, but that was the beginning for me. And it was really interesting because at the time, literally, and this is a true story, their potters shunned me because I was slipcasting. It was in the mid 80s and late 80s. It was still not considered real pottery. And I remember one time standing in line for dinner with Ellen Shankin with a group of other potters at an ACC show. So we were roommates, best friends, and so I'm like, and I remember when someone was just kind of said, there was despair. You could tell I wasn't part of the group. I was being excluded. There was no question about it. And I said, well, my husband, Richard Hensley, oh, you're married to Richard Hensley. All of a sudden I was allowed to be at the dinner. But many years later, I was on a panel at NCCA, with people, talking about the legitimacy of slipcasting as just another tool, like every other tool that we have. And it is not a tool just necessarily for speed, but it is a tool for specific things that are really easier if you create a complicated model and then you create a mold for it. But it has a place for even simple things. It's like the wheel. It's like everything else. It's just another tool. And my sculptures are laboriously coil built. So I've always kept my hand. They evolved from slab built into coil building. And I love coil building. I just think it's the most meditative, relaxing. Honestly, I just love it.
As I'm hearing you talk about the evolutions of your career, I just think about flexibility. Like as an artist, you've changed your goals and you've changed your, I'm sure subject matter over and over and over again to have a career that's decades long. I think that's a really good example for younger artists that want to be known for one thing. Like you mentioned raku, that was the thing you were known for, but that was 30 years ago.
40, I believe.
Can you talk a little bit about the flexibility that's needed to have a long career in clay?
I've always been very grateful that at a pretty early age, that I had this kind of precocious success with something that, I was making. And I had an NEA grant at 28 years old. I was teaching summer school at Alfred. I was teaching, I really had what you would say now is a, pretty precocious success at that age. And after about 5 years of that, I was just like realizing I'm kind of burning out. I was doing all kinds of different things within that work. I was not a production potter. I was slab building these complicated baskets and forms, but still, relatively speaking. And when I changed, I just said, I can't do this anymore. I feel it in my body, and I've done now subsequently many times in my life. I feel it in my body. I'm done with this. So I made a real jump to another kind of work that people joke was my black period, very dark, these just big dark things anyway. And I got dropped from a book that was going to feature me. I got dropped from my gallery in New York they didn't drop me. They just said, "What the hell are you doing?" They did later keep me. But I had and even pottery friends were like, "What are you doing? You were doing so well." And I had a young child at the time, and I was supposed to go to NCECA and talk about making a living as a potter. I was supposed to be on this panel with Kurt Weiser and Tom Splett and Sandy Simon and myself. And I literally made myself sick and had to drop out, and Chris Guston took my place. And so I realized I wasn't really making a living, and I didn't know what the hell I was doing, but I just carried on. I did not stop what I was doing. Somehow I got through it. And then within a few years, I was doing work that people appreciated again. And that was my foundation. And I think I'm proud of that story now, because I've continued to change my work. When I stopped making the slip cast vase figures that I also, was known not as much in the pottery world, but in the design world. And I was very successful at it. And I'm telling you, I get emails every day from someone begging for me to make one again. I haven't made them in 20 something years because they broke theirs. But when I was done, I was just done. I walked away once again. I was like, no, I can't do this anymore. I've come up with every idea within the incarnation of this kind of work, and my sculpture has changed and my pottery has changed. And I think it's very hard to do. I never want to downplay how hard it is, because my husband and I were both making a living. There were times where it was stressful for him, or the other way around at times. We really, I taught at that college for 15 years, but part-time, and that didn't happen until I was in my 50s, at Hollins University. So it's not always easy. And so I would never tell everyone, oh, you have to change your work. But I just think as an artist, it's important to always keep that in your soul, that you are an artist and that you want to always try your best to keep that alive and to not just copy yourself for your whole lifetime.
Well, I wanted to come full circle and come back to the symposium and talk about this year. This is the 11th year. So, Dara, could you go through who's going to be there and also how people could register for it?
This year, our presenters are Margaret Bowles, Chatsania Lane Dean, Lorna Meaden, and Linda Sorman. And our keynote speaker is Mary Dana Hinton. She is the president of Hollins University. And let's see, the symposium is from June 13 to 15. And you can register by going to hollins.edu/WWWC. You can also follow us on Instagram. Just search Women Working with Clay Symposium, and there's a link in the bio there to go to the website. And the first 30 people to register get a $50 discount on the symposium. So early bird registration is still active. And we also offer scholarships and assistantships. So we have, thanks to the Blue Ridge Potters Guild, we have 4 scholarships that we can offer. And we have, I believe, 4 assistantships as well. Yeah, the applications are on the website.
I wanted to thank you both for taking the time to do this. It was really, really good to chat.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thank you, Ben. It's been great. Really great to see you.
I'd like to thank Donna and Dara for taking the time to come on the show. I did want to highlight that the assistantship and scholarship deadline is April the 15th. So by the time that this episode comes out, you'll have just about a day to get your application in. If you're interested in applying for that or registering for the symposium, look for Women Working in Clay Symposium at hollins.edu. Before we go, I wanted to thank today's sponsors. This show is made possible by the 2022 Woodfire NC International Conference, Amico Brent, and Scut Ceramic Products. If you're interested in becoming a sponsor, you can get in touch through the network website, which is brickyardnetwork.org. I'll be back next week with another episode. Thank you all for tuning in.
If
If you'd like more information on the artists on the show, or if you'd like more information about the workshops and events that I'll be having in the next couple months, you can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook under Carter Pottery. Another great way to support the show is to leave me a comment on iTunes. To do that, search Tales of a Red Clay Rambler under iTunes Podcasts, and you'll find a page that's linked to our show. Thank you guys for the support.
We respectfully acknowledge and honor all Indigenous communities whose lands we reside on in the United States, and recognize that we are uninvited guests on the occupied, unceded, and ancestral lands of over 500 nations indigenous to North America. By acknowledging and reflecting upon the contemporary lived experiences and histories of the Indigenous peoples here and globally, we may begin to take essential steps towards creating a more equitable world. Learn more through the hashtag Honor Native Land initiative of the U.S. Department of Arts and Culture, and consider contributing to Indigenous-led organizations doing important work to further health and wellness, sovereignty, and self-determination of the first people of the lands you reside. This podcast is a production of the Brickyard Network, an extension of the Archie Bray Foundation for the Ceramic Arts. To find out more about our lineup of ceramic podcasts, visit brickyardnetwork.org.